name is Jocelyn Kelly, and this is my story of finding me. Things don't just happen, they happen justly. Accepted the job, started the job, worked out of the Dallas office. That spring, my parents came down with my son, who, by the way, decided during this process that he did not want to move, and my parents agreed that he'd stay with them. So I was dealing with those decisions because I didn't have a part in it. That was what they chose to do. Um, but in that instance, when they came down, I'm seeing my parents graying, and I'm seeing my son getting older, and I said, no, it's time for me to come home. I didn't say it to them, but I said it to myself. So when I went back to work that next Monday, I asked for a meeting with my manager and her manager and asked about the transfer. At that point in time, my direct manager, the one who hired me, said we need to make it fast because I'm taking another position in another area. And her manager said, I want to facilitate it and make sure it's smooth. So we chose a date and we began the process to do the transition. In the meantime, I received a call that my son's father was found dead. So I immediately had to get back home. Again, reflecting on the conversation that I had had with my manager when I first started, that there's no need to take off time. We'll work it out. And in that instance, I was able to come home and spend about a month making sure that my son was whole, that whatever was going on with him having to adjust, that his mother's not around every day. And even though his father wasn't a necessarily active part in his life, he's still his father, to make sure that he was okay. Stayed that time, returned back to Dallas, began to pack up my stuff, packed everything up. I believe it was the 4th of July weekend. Drove 19 hours, just like I came, minus the big old TV, but my clothes, my shoes, and everything I could get into my car. And I took that 19-hour drive by myself, me, XM radio, prayer, worship, and the comedy station. And we got back here, and it was so funny when I drove back up. I drove to my parents' house. I drove along the side, and my dad was cutting the grass, and I blew the horn and waved. And he just waved like I was a regular neighbor, and then he just kind of stopped in his tracks, like, wait, you're not supposed to be here. Pulled in the driveway, walked into the house, and my son was coming up the stairs, and I was like, hey, Jay. He said, hey, Ma. And he's like, wait, you're not supposed to be here. And so he hugged me, and tears running down his face. And then a few minutes later, my mom came through the kitchen, and she said, what are you doing here? I said, you called this yesterday and told me you had a T-shirt for me. So I was coming to pick up my T-shirt. Needless to say, they were all over ecstatic that I was there. And so now the transition of transitioning back into my home began. Um, it was a transition. By this time, my son was pretty well into his teens, well into puberty, well into carving out his own space in life, and also challenging all of the questions and feelings that I had, he had, and things of that nature, and me taking back the active role of his mother. That he was in a private school at that time, and he was an avid athlete, and the school he was at, I began to watch. His grades were horrible, but he was the captain of this and he was the captain of that, and they were awarding him, in my opinion, for the wrong things. The things that the educational part, they were not helping him, and he was failing. So I challenged them. And my parents committed to paying this tuition because, again, I'm in the rebuilding stage, so I not necessarily had the money for the private school. But it angered me when I started to ask questions about his academics, and they shrugged or they couldn't give me direct answers. But all they could tell me is how great an athlete he was. The world doesn't care. Well, they don't. They don't care how great an athlete you are. If you're not personable, if you don't have, if you can't count your own money or understand how that money works, or if you don't have basic knowledge skills, in my opinion, everything else is worthless. And I wanted my son to have a strong foundation. I wanted my son not to be the big man or create this aura about himself that he had to be this thing that other people poured in him, but I wanted him to be his own man. So I pulled him from that school and I put him into a public school. And I could see that he was having a time adjusting. But I was a day late and a dollar short, in my opinion. But God reminds me things don't just happen, they happen justly. During that time, I did notice that some things were happening. I noticed the smell of marijuana and I challenged him on that, about smoking it. And some other things came out about selling it, smoking it, whatever. And I challenged him on it. And I explained to him at that time that first and foremost, your grandparents have worked tirelessly to make sure that you have everything you want and more. I may not can't provide it for you at the level of which you think you need to have it, but don't throw away your life. You have so much opportunity. He had a major anointing on his life. And I saw it and I felt it. And I tried to encourage him as such. And I know he was dealing with a lot. Me leaving. Him seeing me with my mental breakdown. His preteen years. Just being a teenager. Being a black boy in a white school. Being a teenage boy. Being an African American teenager. Not having his father, even though he wasn't in his life. Now he was really not in his life because he was no longer living. So many things had been taken from him. And so my job was, I just wanted to pour back into him. I wanted to build him up. I wanted him to be a responsible man. I did not want him to be a statistic. So I worked overtime. And sometimes I think maybe I was a little too hard on him. But my job was to take my prince and mold him so that he would be the best king he could be. And so half the time he was doing things that I was like, wow, Jalen, this is incredible. And then the other times I'm looking like, dude, really? No, stop it. This is not what we do. And I chose to maybe do like the other people did. I focused on the good things and I applauded and I encouraged. And I tussled with the bad things, trying to discourage, trying to cut off, trying to confine, kind of trying to restrict. And got to the point where I made a decision that I could no longer work in Chicago and be that parent that needed to be right there in his face. Took another job cut, pay cut, to come and make sure I was in his face. Things don't just happen, they happen justly. The time that I went away, I was able to get back to me, in my senses, but at the same time, I got time to spend quality time with my son, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And those memories I cherish all the time. He made a huge announcement his senior year, and that was he wanted to go into the military. And I challenged him, and I'm like, why you want to go in the military? Well, he was working towards being an Eagle Scout. He always liked guns, and I think that was part of the scouting experience, because they taught them, and that's part of the scouting experience, so that they know what they are, how to use them, and not just go about and have them. Not only that, but it was part of youth. That was, video games and everything else. They had these things. So deep in his heart, it was about service. How can I protect? He was a protector. He always wanted to protect. As much as we may have gotten into it in his high school years, he may say anything to me, but nobody else could say anything to his mother. And that was something that I relish about him. So he graduated from high school, and we got him ready to leave for the military. And I'll never forget, the military is really funny. So they had given us one date that he would leave, Then they called up out of the blue and said, nope, he's got to go to MEPS today. We're getting ready to do our whole transition, and he's getting ready to go to basic today. So I had to stop what I was doing, rush home, rush to him, make sure he had everything he needed, get him to the van, which was going to transport them to the center. And then they gave us a schedule when we could actually show up at MEPS and watch him get sworn in. And as we waited for him to come back to the lobby with us, my mother and I talked, and we said this experience will either make him or break him. But a good friend of mine years ago had an older friend, and we used to talk about parenting and life. And one thing that I relish that she said to me was, as parents, we pour into our children everything they need. As the Bible say, train them up as a child, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. And she used to say that to me all the time, because at that point in time, she was raising a granddaughter, and her granddaughter was giving her pure hell. But she said, I'm not, I'm challenged, I'm struggling, but I am going to rest on train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old from it, he won't depart. So that day at MEPS, I relented on that scripture, and I hugged and I kissed my baby, and I watched the bus drive away. And I hold that memory in my heart. That was I believe it was August 6th, 2013. He went to South Carolina for basic training. And when he finished basic training, we drove down for his graduation. Incredible. Incredible how they brought them out and how they presented them to us and how they were treating them. And what I saw was a odd teenage boy when he left had really transformed into a man who stood tall, who looked like he was ready to take on the world. And so after they finished their whole presentation, they made an announcement to go out to the field and greet your soldier. And he was still standing at attention. And I walked up, and he just was looking straight ahead. And I was like, Jalen? And the tears just ran down his face. And he finally broke formation. He just gave me the biggest hug in the world. And I told him how proud I was. And it was incredible. And he continued to do great things. He got 2 promotions in his first year in the military. Just like any other teenage boy transitioning into adulthood, he did have some challenges. He did get into some trouble. But I drew from my strength and my life experience is that you'll be okay. We're going to all have challenges, but you're going to get through it. And in his own way, he got through it. On December 4th, 2014, I was headed home from work, and I got this text message. And oddly, that week, I talked to him at least 1 to 2 times a day. And prior to that, I maybe talked to him maybe once a week. But this week, that week of the 4th, which this was a Thursday, starting maybe that Saturday, I talked to Jalen almost every day. Several times a day, not almost. Several times a day. So when I got this text on Thursday about 5:15, I looked at my phone, and it said how much he loved me, how much he respected everything that I've done, the discipline, the good things, the sacrifices. And then he said how much he loved Granny and Pawpaw and Uncle Reggie and Aunt Kelly. And he couldn't wait to see us all again. Something about that message didn't sit right. And immediately something inside said, pick up the phone and call him. And when you call him, be as positive as you can. Be as upbeat. Just be super energetic. And I followed that feeling. I pulled into the garage, I pulled out my phone, and I called him. He answered the phone. And I said, "Hey, Jay, what's up, pumpkin?" And he said, "Hey, Mom." And he immediately started crying. And he told me about the what had happened to him that day. And he just sobbed. And I told him, I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, slow down, slow down. We've been through so much. We'll get through this too." And he said, "Mom, I love you, but I'm done living." And hung up. Tried to call him back, went straight to voicemail. Tried to call him back, went straight to voicemail. Well, he and my mother were like best friends. So I called her and I said, "Have you talked to Jalen?" She goes, "No." I said, "I need for you to call him. Call him now. What's going on? Call Jalen now." So while I got off the phone calling her, I immediately called the military police. And I said, "Something is going on with my son, and you all need to find him." And so I gave a little bit of description, car, his phone number, etc. And she said, "Okay." Within 2, 3 minutes, they called me back, and she wanted more information. And she said, "Let me call you back." When we got, long story short, probably about 15 to 20 minutes out after I got off the phone with him, he drove his car into the Cumberland River and committed suicide. In that whole period in time, I made the first call. Then his superiors and friends began to see clues that he had left behind. And they too were trying to piece it all together. So the calls that she made back to me was basically to get some confirmation of information so they could begin to find him. And they did find him very quickly. And he was on the ramp into leading into the boat ramp leading into the Cumberland River. And two plainclothes police officers approached the car, and they tapped on the window asking if he was okay. And they said he looked up, locked the door, and immediately sped off into the Cumberland River. This was early December. The waves were really high, and the cop said he tried to grab the handle, but he had to let it go because the waves were so high, and he would have been pulled into the water with them. And they described how the car floated for a little while, and then all of a sudden took a succinct nosedive straight down. So that night was really challenging, from the standpoint of my mother continually calling, "Well, did you call back? Did you call back?" And something, that same voice that told me to be positive, came to me and basically gave me some sense of peace, like, "Stop it, just be cool." I had been studying Jacob and Joshua, but Job came to mind. "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, but blessed be the name of the Lord." And Job survived so much, and whatever's going on, we too would survive it. Got peace, and a little bit, still worried, but my mom called, and I never forget this conversation. And I said, "Mom, I'm trying to allow these people to do their job. I'm not gonna keep calling them. I need for them to do their job. Don't you have faith?" And she said, "Not right now." So at that point, I had to have faith for her, for me, and everybody that was involved. I finally laid down. Didn't go to sleep, but I just laid down in my bed. It's probably like 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I closed my eyes. Never slept, but closed my eyes. And when I laid down, I felt a heaviness next to me. And I could hear Jalen's voice saying, "I didn't know what else to do. I'm sorry to hurt you. But I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do." I shook it off. I got up, cleaned, did whatever I could. 5 o'clock that morning, I called the MPs again. And the person that I talked to, I explained who I was and what I was trying to do, and he said, well, we had to stop the search last night because the water was rough, but the car meeting matching his description had gone into the water, and we couldn't find it after so long, so we stopped the search because the weather was so bad. And I said, sir, what are you saying? Do I need to be there? Do I need to come there? He was like, oh, we'll let you know when everything is figured out. I hung up the phone, grabbed everything, jumped in the car, told my mom I was going to Kentucky to go see what was going on. And she said, please come get me. So we sailed out. We got there. And as we arrived, we saw the search parties everywhere. And I began to sob. And the lead investigator saw me, and he rushed to me and took me into this observatory and began to give me an update of what was going on. And he asked me some questions, asked me had I spoken to him. I told him about the conversation, and he said, I need you to stay in here. We have located the car. Um, they brought the car up and they said, well, why don't we go? And I said, no, I have to see it for myself. So I watched the car come up, and they had it wrapped, but I had to see it. I had to see it for myself because I couldn't believe that this was happening. State of shock, complete state of shock. Um, Different things went on. We ended up staying the night, and we left and headed back home the next morning. And the Army is very good about providing you support. So as soon as we were back in Gary, so was my grief officer. And he met me, and he began to give me directions and things of that nature. And he says, by this time it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. He said, now Monday morning, this is what we're going to do. I said, Monday morning, I'm going to work. He said, ma'am, you're not going to work. This is all shock. This is all trying to adjust to the realness that this is really real, that Jalen's not coming back. And when they finally brought him back, they brought him back with hero's honors. I remember going to the airport, and they flew him in on a Southwest airline, and we were on the field, on the airfield when they brought the plane back. The pilot that flew the plane came down to greet us and joined the family. Everybody on that plane was looking out the window, and his casket came out of the plane wrapped in the flag. They gave him full honor as a hero. The flight came in pretty late that night, but I was adamant. I had to see my son. So we got back to the funeral home, and they said, I understand, we will get him. Just give us a second because things shift in flight and in transportation. Give us a minute. We want it to be right for you. I entered the room by myself. I was adamant. I didn't need anybody else in there when I saw him. My baby boy was sleeping. He was sleeping. He looked peaceful. He looked peaceful. The next week, we used that time to lay him to rest. And things don't just happen, they happen justly. And I remember years ago, this individual making this profound statement. The opposite of the will to live is the will to die. We talk about having faith. We talk about mental health. We talk about mental fortitude. We talk about folks that have committed suicide, who have attempted to commit suicide. And they make statements like, What There's nothing this bad for you to leave this world. But God is in control, we're not. And the the truth of the matter is that all the stuff that he was dealing with, I'll never know. If I knew why he did it, perhaps he'd still be here. If I had the solutions, then maybe my baby boy would still be here. But the fact of it is that I have to trust that God knows best. That is his plan, his divine will, his divine strategy to make everything happen the way he sees fit. He wrote the story. We're the actors in the play. His divine will. And through this experience, I've learned that God is going to have his way, either voluntarily or involuntarily. No matter of what my desires are, God has already worked out everything the way he'd have it. He's poured into me everything that I need for every challenge that I'm going to experience in life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's already equipped me with everything. I'm fully equipped for everything. Just like that day when Jalen made that decision, when he was born 19 and a half years prior to that date, God already knew what was going to happen. And he had begun to prepare us in a variety of ways. I truly believe God doesn't give us more than we can handle, and he gives it to us on purpose. From Jalen's life, he gave me so much purpose. From Jalen's death, he's given me so much purpose. The destiny is strong. From this situation finding me, I've come to the realization that we all go through stuff. And we have to love to live because there's a purpose. So every breath that we have is on purpose. Because there's something that we're supposed to be doing or something that we're destined to do. And we're here to witness that thing and make sure that God's will is fulfilled. And in the interim, or as Iyanla says, in the meantime, we're either being prepared. No, it's not we are being prepared to handle everything that's coming. So we have to have the love for life. But there are times when we are at our wits' end. And then that's when we have to hold on to that thing that we love. And we have to live to love. It's a constant circle. You got to tie a knot and hold on, because God's will be done. And when it's time for us to make that decision, to understand that everything that was destined to us to do on this side is complete, we have to have the will to walk into God's grace when he welcomes us in. These are things that I have come to embrace as part of this journey. My mother teases me a lot, and she says, you're like a cat, but you got a lot more lives than 9. And every time you fall or you're falling, you always seem to end up on all fours or standing straight up. Things don't just happen, they happen justly. You can't have a testimony without a test. And I thank God for the experiences that he has given me stewardship over. Jalen, the failed relationships, the failed businesses, the unhappiness, the depression. All of those have come to shape the woman that I am becoming. It is shaping the mother that I am. It shaped the wife that I am. It allowed for me to be open, even though I had been hurt, open to receive love. It allows me to be open to continue to be a giver and give love in spite of what others may have done or I felt that they had done towards me. it doesn't matter. Because above all, I know my worth. I've created my boundaries. And I know above everything, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Hi, this is Jocelyn, and I want to thank you for watching my story of finding me.